And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody, depending where you are in the world. Just to confirm, can anybody confirm that you can see my screen, Jira?
Yeah, yep.
Excellent, thank you. As Jamie mentioned, this is the third session out of a workshop of three, an overview, and then the previous session was about how to use the tool, in this case, Jira Advanced Roadmap, in the context of the role of Scrum Master, Release Manager, Program, Project Management. This session today, I'm going to throw some of my personal recipes in the context of how to use a tool as a product owner, product manager. Should there be interest on repeating these sessions, I mean, you can view the videos that have been pre-recorded, and the Scrum Masters of the Universe channel will contain those. But if there's enough interest, please feel free to reach out to the Scrum Masters of the Universe. If you want to have live sessions again, repeated in the future, I'm more than open to do that as well. Hopefully today you'll get some interesting feedback or interesting knowledge, and feel free to share of your own knowledge as well as I go along presenting. This is meant to be a more interactive session than the session that I had at first. The overview, I asked people to kind of table questions towards the end. Here you can ask questions during the presentation if you have a sticky point that you like to address. Feel free to raise your hand or post a question in the chat. Without further ado, my name is Ralph Figueroa. I'll be your presenter today, and I am a operational coach here, based here in the San Francisco Bay Area, as well as an agile coach. And so I focus a lot of my efforts working with organizations in optimizing the way they use agile and the tools, in this case, in this context, Jira, to deliver value as an organization in the context of the different roles. So let's just start, diving into some of the topics that we have today, since we don't have a lot of time. And I'm going to be shifting my eyes up and down because I do have two screens that are staggered. So bear with me as I go through my list of things that I want to cover. The first thing I want to cover is, for some of y'all that did not attend the previous two sessions, so just a quick overview of where you find Jira Advanced Roadmap in your Jira Enterprise Edition. It's already included if you're using Jira Enterprise Edition. You shouldn't have to pay any additional licensing fees. It's just a matter of discovering it. It's actually in the top menu. Jira Advanced Roadmap used to be, or was launched originally as Jira Plans in their rewrite, and they never changed the branding to Jira Advanced Roadmap. So if you see Plans in your Jira instance, you click on it and you can actually access Jira Advanced Roadmap. It's one and the same tool. So, and to build a plan, you can build it out of a single project or multiple projects. So the tool allows you to aggregate information from multiple teams. Say, for example, you're a product manager and you're working with several of the product managers, 3 or 4, because 3 or 4 teams are collaborating in the development of your product cycle. So you can use your Advanced Roadmap in order to aggregate all the information with regards to the artifacts, meaning epics, stories, task box, as well as to map out dependencies across teams, right? And I will demonstrate some of that here real quick when we shift to Jira Advanced Roadmap. So the first topic I'd like to bring up in the context of product. A lot of my topics today are going to be in the context of product and PO, product owner, product management, is ranking epics. Now, I have a version of Jira, which is on the cloud, maybe looks different than a version that you're using if you are using an on-prem version. And so if I enable my epics here to show up in the pane, if I'm doing that within Jira, you're kind of limited to drag and drop functionality as a product owner, product manager. If you are trying to rank up, stack rank your epics. Now you can use the fixed versions if you want to narrow down. In this case, I'm looking into the future for my release. In this case, the team is looking to the Q4 release, which is the next release we're going to be planning. This is a fictitious project, by the way, not real data, but the structure will be the same as you will see in a real project. The challenge here is that when you apply the fixed versions filters in Jira, the epics do not filter out, right? So you end up with the same list, and you have to kind of expanding and opening them up in order to find out which one is for which release. For the good or for the bad, that just happens to be the way it operates in Jira. So, and I'm doing that call out in order to start presenting what is the value that Jira Advanced Roadmap brings into the table. I'm going to shift to this tab. This is my Jira Advanced Roadmap view that I've been using in the previous 2 sessions. And I kind of open it in advanced. What I wanted to demonstrate here is that I could use the filters. For example, if I am a product owner and my team is already working in the Q2 release, but let's say I want to start talking to my team about the scope of work that I want to start scoping out and pre-planning, having conversations between engineering and product management for the Q4 release. Without having to write JQL, I go to the filters and I apply, in this case, for the optimized agile team. Notice that I have multiple teams that are part of this view. I'm just going to focus in the one team that is collaborating. And by clicking on the checkbox, I actually reduce the amount of epics that I have here. Now, this, for the moment, this represents the epics that I have that are targeting the Q4 release, right? Underneath, if I expand, I can see the collection of stories that are associated with those epics, which is kind of groovy, right? I can drag and drop stories between the different epics. If I decide, that story belongs to a different epic, I could do so by simply dragging and dropping, and I can just drag that story into this epic, and that will bind the story to that epic without having to open the story and updating the epic link and in Jira. A lot of these elements or processes you can do in Jira natively. It just happens to be a little more fluid in the way you do it in Jira Advanced Roadmap. And so the drag and drop functionality also affects epics, right? So if you're in the context of my upcoming release of Q4, if I wanted to communicate and articulate to my team the priorities of my epics is based on drag and drop, I can drag and drop here to my heart's content. And notice that it's keeping track of the changes in the far top corner here, in the right top corner. It's telling me that I have made 4 changes. And that is to say that a lot of the changes that you do in Jira Advanced Roadmap, you have the ability to replicate those changes into Jira. They just don't replicate by automatically, right, by default. You have to literally just go back into Jira Advanced Roadmap and say, for example, save changes to Jira, and it will just change those changes, whether it's ranking, whether you're changing assignees, story points, whatever changes you made, you have the ability to save them to Jira, so you don't have to do dual entry or work in 2 tools, or you have the ability to discard those changes if you realize those changes were invalid and you were just doing what-if scenarios, right? So that gives a lot of flexibility and comfort to teams, so that unlike other tools that are out there that have used where changes automatically replicate to Jira. And then they realize later on, oops, that was a mistake of my part. We were just having a conversation and we just wanted to visualize things. This gives you the ability to do pre-planning or what if scenario. And then later on say, those scenarios are valid, I want to save them. Those scenarios are not valid, I want to discard them. That's up to you later on. Now, typically, and some of this information may be anecdotal. I worked with an organization in the past where they had Jira and they were using ranking as in the fashion that I'm using ranking here. And it so happens that the children that were associated with those ranks were also shifting underneath. So that is to say, if I take this epic and I move it up, the stories in the product backlog shifted up and down as well. And so the way we discovered that is because engineering keep stack ranking the stories based on their execution, with their perceived execution. And when product management moved the ranking of the epics, they were shifting back and forth of the product backlog. I was not a Jira admin in that organization, so I just looked at it close enough and realized that indeed that was happening. And they engaged with Atlassian and somehow they resolved the issue. But because of that, and because to articulate the ranking to people who are outside of Jira is kind of difficult, meaning to the VP of product management, VP of engineering, or directors that are not involved with the day-to-day operation of the team. We also introduced a custom field, and Jira Advanced Roadmap will support most custom fields as well as the native fields that are found in Jira. And notice I said most, because multi-linear fields, such as the description field, are not supported in Jira Advanced Roadmap. So one custom field, that we created as an organization is this, and this is one of my favorite fields that I have introduced in other organizations, which is the feature ranking field. And the feature ranking field is a numeric field. It takes values, and how you formulate the values of your ranking depends on you and your organization. Some organizations prefer to use something called RISE, and it's a ranking methodology. And some organizations want to take a simple path, such as, I just want to rank in intervals of, say, 5, right? So meaning my top feature will be 0, my next feature will be 5, my next feature will be 10 and 15, and you continue on that path and so on. And so at the end of the day, what that allows you to do is, let me just remove this filter on the fixed version, is that you can see the ranking of your features at the feature level based on intervals of 5. And you, by this up arrow, in some of the fields in Jira Advanced Roadmap, you'll see you have the ability to sort. So I can sort, and now I see some level of sorting, some organizations out of the chaos that I have. In this case, I'm sorting descendingly. So I'm seeing the least valuable to the most valuable feature. So you can keep sorting until you get the order that you like. But what this is articulating to the team and to people outside of the team is that here I have a collection of features, and in order of priority, based on conversations that I have had with customers as a product manager. I keep clicking, my apologies. These are my top features. This is my very top feature. and this is the ranking of the remaining features. And you can have X amount of features. Let's say you have 200. This allows you to visually provide a value that says, when I'm going to do planning, ideally, what you want to do is start planning considering the very top feature that you have in rank features. Now, some features are customer-facing features. Some features might be internal-facing features, meaning technical debt, engineering-specific features that the customers, they do not see in the form of a UI, but they see in the form of performance, right? Maybe refactoring code, again, technical debt. So what we usually recommend in those instances is engineering can create epics. In this case, the epics in this project represents features, but they must communicate to product management. I created epic XYZ. I like to give it a certain ranking value, and the importance as to why, the justification, right? Not everything can be priority one, otherwise nothing is a priority. So, and that's a conversation that the teams have. And so product management gives the ranking value. So when we get into a planning session, into a future release, we can actually, by simply applying a filter, we can see things that are already on flight, as in the case of the Q release, my Q2 release, which at this moment in time, I was not using the filtering, the ranking, or in my future release, in this case, the Q4 release. Oops, this is the wrong project. Let me just optimize Agile team. So if I'm looking at my existing project, my Q2 project, which is what my team is presumably working right now on, I can see the work of this ranked features, one feature that was not ranked, bad on me, and I can see the progress of those features. But if I'm going to do planning sessions in the future for the future release, I can just might as well click the Q2. My next release is a Q4 release. This team release on a quarterly basis, by the way. And then I can see also the ranking of those features as a rank. And if something is not ranked, and we have to have a conversation. This is a release readiness epic, which typically is not engineering. I mean, it's not customer facing. It's more of an internal release readiness epic that contains internal steps to get hardening the release. And we'll just rank it at 0 because we know it's important. But if I happen to have a number of epics, say 200 or 300, I will list them all here, rank them. And so as I'm having conversations with the engineering team, I use a fixed version, which in Jira Advanced Roadmap, they call the fixed versions field releases, but it's the same as a fixed version in Jira, right? So basically what you do as a product owner, product manager, and as a team actually, is that you discreetly want to mark the things that you desire to have for the Q4 2024. And here's where a lot of the conversation occur between engineering and product management. When I'm doing pre-planning with a team, product management will come in, rank the features, and then mark all the features that they would like, the desire to have in the Q4 2024 release. During that exercise, and we're not talking, this is prior to the planning, right? The bigger planning, PI planning, whatever is a flavor of planning that your organization have, there has to be communication prior to between engineering and product management. What happens is that then engineering comes in and they provide an engineering response. Now, an engineering response, some teams, they like to collect that data in Confluence, and some teams, they are allowed to create custom fields in Jira. They'll have custom fields within Jira. For example, in this case, I'm just going to open this epic. And so by ranking, in this fashion, I can then start providing engineering response, not in the lowest epic in the list, but I can then start going and pecking the pecking order, right? Based on the priority, the visual priority that I see. So anybody can actually rank things up and down by dragging and dropping. But in the ideal case scenario, you only want to allow product management to be the only ones who change the value here, right? They don't set the value alone, but they're the only ones who are allowed, right? This is a working agreement between the teams so that not anybody can go in there and change the ranking, right? So that said, using the ranking with discipline, you can actually start going through the list of the epics as an engineering team. And within Jira, I created in my Jira instance these pre-planning responses. And this is actually where engineering will preface the first response, and they'll put in a response that they want to provide. This is an epic that we will not be able to do in the current release because we have to do some plumbing work, meaning some foundational work, to support this feature and functionality, whatever that feature and functionality is. And that is based on the description, right? In the ideal case scenario, you have the epic filled up with the description as to what the feature is about and the acceptance criteria. Engineering provides a response. To that response, product management, using the same field, they'll prefix their comments with P, for product, and they can negotiate, and they have a record as to what the comments are as to the plan of action. And let's say this feature is one feature that we agreed that we're not going to take for this release, right? We can always add this to a future fixed version by removing the fixed version from here and adding, say, for example, if I happen to have already there are 2025 Q1 release, it's like, this is something we're going to do in the Q1 2025. Or if we're going to do a flavor of this foundational work, I can create an epic that is really for the Q4 release and then have the Q1 2025 release as a separate epic altogether. So in the context, I think what I want to present here is really that you can introduce, and you're welcome to introduce if your environment allows it to, your Jira admins are flexible, the creation of a feature ranking field, which is a custom field, as well as the pre-planning responses field to collect responses from engineering and product management during their conversation so that they can go back into history and say, why did we take this feature? Why did we not take this feature? And so basically what this allows you to do is create a waterline that says, for the coming release, out of the 200 features, we're going to be able to only do 20 of those features based on engineering resources, budget, and time given to complete those features, right? There are a couple of factors that you have to consider. But in essence, you can use the ranking field and the fixed version field to then define, okay, these are the 20 features that we're going to take. And the remaining features that are not going to be applicable for this release, they can be either tagged for the next coming release as a desired set of features, and they keep rolling, or you can tag them in some instances. I work with organizations that they have a fixed version called future, meaning we want to do this feature. We don't know when we're going to do it. So that the when is something that we'll discuss in a planning session, right? So again, the process depends on the culture of the company. What I want to really showcase is that you can support that process via Jira Advanced Roadmap in a very clear, crisp way by using custom fields such as this numeric ranking field. And by the way, it takes integers. So, real numbers. So if you want to really break this down and say 11.1, 11.2, you could do so as well. and it will allow you to sort by it. The premise of the ranking with intervals, if you think about it, an advantage, and this is not about Jira Advanced Roadmap, but when you rank with intervals of 5 or intervals of 10, what happens is that what happens if a new feature shows up in the intake process, but is more important than 11, but less important than 10. If you do it sequentially, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you have to slide, or you end up sliding that new epic. If it's less important than 10, more important than 11, that becomes 11, and you have to rank everything underneath again, which is a lot of pain, right? When you do it with slots that are open in between, it allows you to take new features and say, okay, that new feature is less important than 11, but more important than 25, and I can just, make it, let's say this is a new feature, I'll make it number 12, and I still preserve the ranking underneath, right? So it allows you to shim in features as they come into the team during the intake process. And that is all part of the exercise that you do during the pre-planning session in order to prepare for that next PI, BRP release planning session, whatever sessions that you do for planning within your organization. Let's see, I'm gonna, and using the fixed version is a way that you can establish what is the desired set of features and versus what's going to be the actual set of features that we are going to have for the release. So at the end of the planning session, in this case, if I'm planning for the Q4 release, then anything that is not for the Q4 release should not have the fixed version Q4 2024, right? You will have the next fixed version that I'll set up in Jira, and you can set up multiple fixed versions into the future in that context, right? Or you'll simply have a future fixed version that is open-ended. All right, so the other part too that I wanted to showcase, and I already did give a preview, is that once you have articulated the fixed versions using the ranking within Jira Advanced Roadmap, if you want to present that information outside of your organization, you can use Confluence, and Confluence have widgets, right? And macros. And you can simply just put a table that anybody outside of the organization can actually view. Say, for example, if you want to share it with the VP of product management or the VP of engineering, and articulate, this is our planned sessions or our planned epics for the Q4 release. I can simply embed a table from Jira into Confluence, and you can add multi-line fields here that will talk about the description of those features as well as the responses. So if you have long verbose responses, that will show up here. This is actually quite useful in order to collaborate and showcase the information outside of the various teams holistically, just to communicate, this is the waterline, this is the feature set that we're going to be, or our MVP, however you want to describe that list, for an upcoming release based on pre-planning. Then we have the planning sessions, and during the planning sessions, we'll go into those features and start understanding sizing, dependencies, and that's really where things get really galvanized, right? That is the exercise that occurs during the planning session, and the idea is to accelerate the planning sessions by having pre-planning conversations, having the planning sessions with the actual engineering teams, and then hardening what that really scope is going to look like. So again, you can use Jira Advanced Roadmap together with Confluence and Jira. They all complement one another. Jira Advanced Roadmap really can become a bolt-on that you can do a lot of the massaging without having to go to Jira all the time. Now, as you're talking to other POs as a product owner, you're most of the time focusing your attention not on the stories, but at the epic level. So if you want to reduce the noise and you don't want to see stories altogether, you can go into Jira Advanced Roadmap, and via the hierarchy field, you can segregate the view to be only about epics. You don't care about anything else, but just epics. The moment that you want to see stories, you just expand from epics to stories, right? So for now, if I have just epics here, one of the things that I can do is start talking to other product managers if I'm collaborating with other product managers about dependencies. And usually product owners, product managers tend to be the first line of having conversations about dependencies with other teams. And so, for me to do my managed account, I have a dependency on another team. And so let's see if I can there you go. Let's say I'm working with another team, and the way I can identify other teams here is the 3 letters represents a Jira project for one team. The 2 letters here, the R2, represents the 2 letters for my R2 team. And notice that I expose here all the artifacts, epics, stories, tasks. That is to say that if I'm talking to another product manager and he or she says, yeah, I have a dependency on you, and I can declare here what kind of a dependency is. So I'm dependent by, so I depend on your team to finish, for example, the Rebel 2 teams, the Safe Credit Card, if that happens to be the dependency, right? And I can declare here what that dependency is by adding it in the incoming dependency column. Likewise, another team can be dependent on this epic to be completed, and they can declare and say, hey, actually you will be blocking me if you don't complete this dependency. And this is blocking, for example, that could be within the same team, right? This will be blocking the completion of my booking, my edit booking functionality. And again, I'm using your advanced roadmap in order to declare those dependencies as I'm having pre-planning conversations or during the PI or BRP planning sessions. I'm declaring dependencies here, and because this view is made out of multiple teams, right? I have here actually 1, 2, 3 teams, right? Rebel, Optimize Agile, and my global initiatives team. I can actually create dependencies across all those 3 teams. Can I expand that view to include more teams? Absolutely. We covered how to create a view in one of the sessions, in the first session, where you can, when we are reviewed how you can aggregate this view made out of boards or projects and have multiple projects. So that in itself gives a lot of power and latitude for you to actually be able to map out all the dependencies. And you can do those dependency mappings in Jira, or you could do them in Jira Advanced Roadmap. And again, once you're done with this session, you can tell Jira Advanced Roadmap, save all the changes that I have done, which I just did now, save them to Jira. So at the end of this session, I'm done. And this links, whether it's dependencies, fixed versions, assignees, story points, sizing, all that information will be saved back and forth between the 2 tools. Any questions so far? Should I continue rambling on here into the sunset? It sounds like everybody's quiet. So my soothing voice is putting everybody at ease, I hope. So let's see. Wanted to cover a topic also that is out of the scope of the tool, but I use the tool very effectively. I have worked with some organizations where they, as an organization, have decided that they want to integrate everybody to use Jira for the good or for the bad, right? And the organization has allowed for a number of years to use teams whatever tool that they chose, be version 1, be Rally, be Microsoft Azure, the ADO solution. And the rollout of those teams into Jira is not something that occurs instant. It requires planning, it requires mapping. There's a little bit of efforts that DevOps have to go through in creating scripts. Now, temporarily, those organizations still have to deliver value to the business. And so if I have a dependency in the context of dependency with another team that is using, for example, Azure DevOps or is using Rally, Jira does not communicate with those tools. So what they have chose to do is they have created custom issue types. And that custom issue types can live in the form of a story or an epic, whichever you prefer. And I don't have a custom issue type called dependencies, but just like you see stories here, some organizations have created a custom issue type called dependency. And what that allows them to do is to create a ticket within Jira that says, say, for example, Ange team is using Azure DevOps. And I say, hey, Ange, and you're the product manager there. I'm the product manager in Team Optimize Agile. And I have dependency on your team to create some API libraries available to me, some calls. I can create the dependency right here within Jira Advanced Roadmap. I don't have to go into Jira. The issues will be listed here, the type of issues that you can create. And say, okay, this dependency is on Ange team. I'll assign it to Ange, or I assign it to somebody that Ange declares to be the proper person within her team, or I assign it to myself in order to track it. What allows you to do is track it in the context of your fixed version, your release, any dependencies that you have external to other teams. So that's one of the many ways that you can actually slice that problem, and you can use your advanced roadmap to map those dependency custom issue types into the relevant epics. One thing you want to do as a practice is not have orphans, meaning orphans is tickets like this one down here. They don't have an epic associated with it. And ideally, you want to map your efforts, your team's efforts, to some kind of, let me just sort by ranking, to one of the many epics that you have here, right? So that you know that effort, that story, task, or bug is affecting specific feature, one of the features that you have for the release. Now, there are some advantages to that, and I will go into that here real quick. For that, let me demonstrate real quick here. And these are concepts, right? These are not behavioral limitations of the tool. I'm just trying to introduce some interesting concepts for you to consider. As you use your advanced roadmap, it facilitates the adoption of those concepts. Here, I switch my view here to look at my current release. This is my team working right now in my current release, and I can see the timeline view here that shows me my release fixed version is in blue. My yellow line represents today. And here are the features that I'm currently working on. And they're colored by status. So this one here that is very skinny is done, right? So it's green. And the blue ones are in progress. No line at all. It means that there's actually no story that is added to a sprint. This team happens to be using Scrum, right? So if they were added to a sprint, it will show up here with some kind of a sprint associated date. The element that I wanted to showcase here, and this is more meaningful, is that you can actually rely by adding the stories into a relevant epic. Say, for example, it's hard for me to track the progress of that story without looking in the context of what features affecting. But if I drag these orphan stories to the right, not just any epic, I'm the PO, I'm the engineering manager, I'm talking to the PO and say, oh, that story belongs to this epic, that story belongs to this other epic. I don't have to open the epic, the story, and update the epic link field. I can just simply drag and drop from jar. But now look what happens. It is updating the amount of issues that are associated with that feature, and it's tracking the progress of those stories in the context of how it's affecting the progress of that feature. So this is very meaningful for people who are outside of your organization, which is trying to find out, for example, you're doing a Scrum or a status review meeting with the leadership team, say directors, senior directors, engineering, members of managers of other teams, which are depending on your product. You can simply hover, and Jira Advanced Roadmap will do a reasonably good job at keeping you up to date with regards to, hey, you know, there's nothing's done here, but 67% of the work is in progress and 33% is in the to-do state. We still have time, so, you know, very little risk. I do have some dependencies, right? Because I'm binding some of those stories here, and together with it, it will drag or bring in the dependencies. Now the bubbles here, they show up in pink. They used to show up in red when the dependencies were in trouble. And here the trouble is the lead time. Ideally, if there's no issues with the dependencies, you see these bubbles like this top dependency up here in blue, meaning the incoming dependency, it seems to be is done, right? Even though it shows a lead time in red, because it's done, it's not considering it a risk anymore. So, so that brings me to two topics. One is, ideally, you can use your advanced roadmap to bring some Jira hygiene or practice hygiene, meaning you want to make sure that stories are mapped to epics, and the drag and drop functionality facilitates that process really easily, right? Two, and that allows you to have more refined and discrete and reliable progress issue count reporting as to the progress of the epic, right? By associating the work underneath, story, task, or bugs, or any custom issue types that you create at the story level. The other concept that it introduces is the need to create epics that are discrete to releases. And this is a very interesting topic that a lot of teams, they really are challenged by. What I mean by that is that when I have an epic created, I want to create that epic to be specific for our release. I could have a master epic that contains all the stories, but if I'm talking about the Q2 release, and let's say I have a homepage for website epic that contains a barrage of stories, all the stories that we have defined in the eternity of that epic, I want to be able to carve out an epic that says, this is the epic for the Q2 release, and together with it, I want to carve out a map to that Q2 release epic, which I'm tagged with the fixed version Q2, all the stories that will be mapped into that epic, and I will tag them with the Q2 release as well. And what that allows me to do is that when I apply a filter in Jira Advanced Roadmap that articulates and talks about the Q2 release, now I can rely on confidence that the epics that I'm showing for, in this case, the Optimized Agile and the Rebel team that are working on collaborating in this release, their features are discretely describing the payload of work that is going towards the Q2 release. Likewise, the progress reporting is really talking about the stories in the context of the features, is rolling up that progress in the context of that release. If you happen to do what most of the teams do, which is they have a global epic that contains all the stories for that feature, what happens is that this progress by issue count will work and will report back, but it would not be in the context of just the Q2 release. It will contain all the releases from here until all the epics are done into the future. So the problem statement that I found from organizations is that I cannot rely on this progress of issue count, for me to understand what is the progress of the release, because now I have the stories that belong to multiple releases, bound to a single epic. So again, carve out epics that are specific to releases, and carve out stories that are specific to that epic for that release, and mark them all with the same fixed version discretely. And that will give you the ability to use Jira Advanced Roadmap to provide a very crisp view of what the payload is. In this case, I am describing here the payload that my team is working for the Q2 release, right? Because I have two teams that I selected the fixed versions. And likewise, in the future, if I'm going to do planning and I want to include two teams in my planning session for the Q4 release, now I can see the discrete list of features because this team is disciplined enough to, again, create epics that are specific and stories that are specific for that release. And now I'm looking at the Q4 payload. And so if I'm trying to articulate to leadership, this is the work that we're targeting. And we want to have conversations as to, do we need to change the scope to accommodate any special needs situations? We could do so using Jira Advanced Roadmap. You could do so using Jira, but it's a little more cumbersome using Jira, especially when you're working across different teams. Let me look at my list. In the meantime, I'll pause while I look at my list. I'll multitask and ask any questions from the audience.
So we had one from Alicia. She talked about adding dependencies via Jira Advanced Roadmap can be tricky though, correct? Because those dependencies exist only in jar. To get a good mapping with an actual ticket, you'd have to create a ticket using whatever issue type. If it needs to appear on the other team's board, and they may have to create that ticket if you don't have the appropriate level permissions to their project.
Correct. That's absolutely correct. Jira Advanced Roadmap will not create the ticket proactively. The ticket has to, the other team, as you're talking as product managers or engineering managers, the other team has to create that story and let you know what that story, just very well the way you would do it in Jira, right? If I were to open this epic here or a story for that matter, it's not specific to just the epic issue type. I will have to go to the child issues and I have to create a dependency from here. It's the same mechanism. The other team will have to have the epic created and will have to have the permissions. Most of the organizations that I work with, they have adopted the mantra of my Jira projects are available for anybody and everybody to see and view. Some organizations, very few though, have decided, my projects are private. So therefore you have to ask me the rights to be able to view and access the information. But the ticket has to be there and you have to know what the ticket is. Does that make sense?
We had another question for me, actually. Can you update descriptions in Jira Advanced Roadmaps?
Unfortunately, no. That's a great question. And that's what I'm meant to suggest. Multi-line fields, for example, I'm going to click here to show unsupported fields. And notice that, and let me actually slow down here a little bit to showcase how I got here. Sometimes I go way too fast for my own good. I went to fields and said, for example, I wanted to add the description field in my fields here in Jira. The description field is a native field. So I type description, nothing comes up. If it's a supported field, it will be supported here. But I also have the ability to, if I create a custom field, such as my pre-planning field, it's a custom field. It's also based on a multi-description field, multi-line field, just like the description field is. And if I type description, design, pre-planning, there you go. my pre-planning field, which is like the description field, is a multi-line field. You can add a lot of information, like a paragraph or two or three or four, right? It is unsupported. So multi-line fields are not supported by Jira, and therefore Jira Advanced Roadmap, that is. Therefore, that's a handicap. And what happens is usually is that when you are in Jira Advanced Roadmap, if you want to view or update the description field, my humble suggestion is, in my case, I'm using a Windows machine. I click on the control key and open that ticket on a separate tab.
Yeah.
If you're using Mac, that's a different story. And then you can proceed to update the description field or any multi-line fields that you have here, right? To Jira, but it's not visible in Jira Advanced Roadmap, unfortunately.
Do you want to take a couple more questions?
Sure.
So Navia, let's see, Navia's asking, how do you use or advise to combine Scrum owned by the team who does delivery, and then Kanban is owned by the team who manages the tickets? How do you advise to combine those teams together on JAR?
You will combine them just the same way that you will combine two teams that are using Scrum or two teams that are using Kanbans, in the very same fashion. Basically, let's say you have an existing plan and you want to add those teams to your existing plan. You come into the again, let me slow down because I tend to go into autopilot and I forget to. People sometimes are learning how to use the tool. You go into plan settings, and under plan settings, you'll see a couple options. I click on issue sources. That allows me to define boards, like if it's a Kanban board or projects or a combination of both, right? And you can add as many as you need to aggregate into your view. And so what happens though is that because the Scrum team, the team that is using Scrum, is using sprints more than likely, right? When you enable the roll-up functionality, it will grab the sprint information automatically and rolls that up for you without you having to do any manual entry in your Advanced Roadmap. The same thing happens with the Kanban team, except that the Kanban team is it's not using sprints, right? That's one of the artifacts of Kanban. But if they're using the target, if they're using date fields, in this case, I'm using the target start, target end date fields, and they are disciplined enough to go into Jira or Jira Advanced Roadmap and tag we have WIP limits within our Kanban team, and we're not going to take more than 3 stories within a certain time frame, and we're going to set dates, right? We're going to set up as part of our WIP working agreements, a story should not take longer than 4 days, right? So you can actually, in Jira or Jira Advanced Roadmap, these fields are exposed. You can set up the dates, and so it will roll up those dates just as well. It will not roll them up automatically because it's not part of Scrum. Notice this S means that these dates are coming from a sprint, sprint field, but it will roll up and grab those dates that you define. If you are relying on the target start, target end date field, you can use other date fields, but I'd suggest you use those 2 fields by default. Are the fields that your Advanced Roadmap out of the box it supports, but it supports a plethora of date fields that you may want to choose to use. And so that's essentially what that will do, is that it will bring and populate then this Gantt chart view, if you will, if you're trying to see the progress at the epic level, and it will roll up that information at the epic level, and then you're going to be able to rely on this Gantt chart view succinctly, having the information from both teams, right? It just happens that one team is not using sprints, and the dates have to be added to the artifacts by themselves manually.
So we had another question. not sure what part of the presentation you were in when this was asked, but it says, can't you also change the view settings to group by equals release to get a good status overview of various releases? And then what are the other group by options?
The group by, you can group by releases, you can group by, there's a few, a few selected options. Assignee, reporter, releases indeed. I mean, you can actually group by releases and you can see what's targeting for what release, right? And the fields will remain still active here. So that's one way of doing it. But you could also, I mean, there are many ways to slice, and the tool gives you the ability to pick the poison that you prefer, right? I mean, in a way, you can group by sprints, which actually also gives you more interesting artifacts about the sprint and the sprint health, the velocity of the team. It so happens that I cannot demonstrate that very well here because this instance is one instance for one person only. But if I had a group of people, I can actually demonstrate that. And you notice that the green bar and the gray bar is actually speaking to the velocity of the team versus the amount of story points are there and how many are done, right? You can actually group by assignee, which is very useful during sprint planning or even daily Scrum meetings, because you've seen people who use JAR and they use the group by and they apply, for example, the active sprint, right? Show me all the active sprints. And so now the information that is here is filtered down to these are the stories that, in this case, this one developer, which is me, right? Because there's only one person in this Jira instance. This is showing me all the stories that Raf has in the context of that sprint. And if I have somebody who has just one or two stories and Raf here has 9, I can have conversations between the members and say, can you help Raf? Can you take some of the work from Raf? It's for us to complete the sprint, right? To bring the burn chart to 0. So it allows you to do resource management, if you will. I don't want to call it capacity management. There's a limited set of capacity that you can do here, but this is one way that you could do that. So you have to play around with the tool and define how do you want to use the group by. It's a matter of preference and optics. I tend to stick around with the none and use the filters, for me to segregate the view. But again, that's a stylistic thing. And once you have the view that you like, one thing that I never shown in any of the presentations that I've given is that you can actually save that view. You can create a new view. So if you're talking in the context of the Q4 release that I was talking about earlier, let me just showcase that real quick, because that's a good point that I always forget to showcase. And then later on I go like, I forget to do that. Here is my Q4 release. And let's say I want to talk to my team about the Q4 release in the future, right? I can create that view and say, this is my 2024 Q4 release. And I'll save it. And what it does, it preserves those settings there. And so the moment that I am shifting the conversations with my team about, for example, either sprint management or I go back to my original view, and if at some point I want to talk about the Q4 release, rather than me going into filters and start selecting the fixed versions, I can literally just go and find that Q4 release view that I pre-created, select it, and it will just bring the fields and the filters that I saved with that view. And I can start that conversation right away without having to manually start going out, selecting the filters that I want to select. And if you want to update these filters and you say, for example, I don't care about talk about things that are done, just want to focus at the conversations and things that are in the to-do or in progress, I can select those and then say, that becomes now my view. Q4, with things that are in flight, right? That still, they have to be worked on. And this is one way, that one functionality or one view that you can create in order to segregate the view. Jamie, any other questions?
Nope, that's it for now.
That's it. Wow. It feels like I've been talking forever. Okay. Right on. So don't have a lot of more material to cover, but I'm just gonna focus on a couple of other topics that I want to share with y'all. Last week I shared in the context of dependencies, and dependencies it seems to be a thorn to a lot of people to manage. Not all dependencies are dependencies against the other team. Some dependencies are risks that you have. Now, earlier I mentioned earlier here today that Jira does not support multi-line fields, but it does support single line fields, and the single line fields will take a number of characters that allows you to be very verbose. Some dependencies can manifest in the form of not a dependency to another team, but maybe some dependencies on work that we have within our team that is not associated with a story. Maybe I have to stand up the servers, but the servers have not come up yet, so I can flag them as an impediment. And then again, I created a custom field here, and I showcased this last week. I said, pending servers availability, right? And so me as an engineer, he or she can actually tag as an impediment and put an impediment with a summary, right? With a justification of what the impediment is. And the beautiful thing of this is that this will show up in your Jira board, which is where your engineers are working at, in the form of this highlighted row or issue. Like you see it every so often with a flag. So any of these issues that I have here, I can actually flag them as a dependency from Jira by right-clicking and say add flag, and it will ask me, do you want to add a comment, right? So that allows you to flag up things that could be a dependency. So when I'm doing planning sessions, whether it's backlog refinement as a product owner, I can see that there are some issues here that have dependencies. Let's just open that issue and look at the comments of that issue in the context of the dependency to understand what the dependency is. So I can help the team in advance unblock or clear up those dependencies as a product owner, product manager, rather than waiting for the sprint planning session and realize we cannot do that story because the dependency is still unresolved, right? If it happens to be not a technical decision, but maybe budget related decision that you have to address, right? And so those dependencies are available. They do showcase in Jira Advanced Roadmap. And the beautiful thing about doing it in either tool, but leveraging that field, is that if you're using Jar and you want to have really succinct conversations, I can just go here, max the fixed version, right? Again, I'm going to focus on the work that my team is currently working on, right? And I'm going to tell the tool as well, hey, filter out things that are flagged, meaning that have a dependency, an impediment of some sort. And voila. Now I can have my conversation. So it happens that my epics, you narrow it down to 3 epics. None of them have dependencies, but the children, they may have dependencies. So now I can just expand those, and I can see, oh, I got a couple issues here with dependencies. So let me address those so that I can help the team move forward if I can address those myself. If not, I leave that story assigned to for example, the engineering manager, and he or she can address those impediments. The idea here is to unblock the team steps in advance before they get into the planning sessions, the sprint planning sessions, so that they can execute against those stories more effectively, right? So it empowers both the product and engineering. That includes engineering, that includes developers and testers, to be able to flag things and communicate clearly across the team without having to rely on Slack communications or Slack channel or emails that can get lost, right? A lot of the information can be captured in Jira. I'm looking at my list here. As a product owner, a lot of the times, product owners that I work in organizations, they want to express a desire to the engineering team. Oh, there's a question there, Ange. Go ahead.
It's from me. I think I might have missed it. I don't know. I've been just drawn to everything you're saying today. Once the impediment is cleared, do you just remove that? And also, I believe, but I just want to be clear that when you do all of this, if you go to the notes or activities, I'm a DevOps girl now, so I forget where it is, but you would see all of the activity that happens. So at some point, if you're like, yeah, I thought I raised a impediment for that you could go and see the activity for that ticket, right?
Yes, exactly. For example, if I let's say, great question. Thank you for raising it up. Let's say I'm going to save these fields. I mean, I created a couple of changes here. I'm just going to save them so that they show up in Jira as well. Now I have parity between Jira. And let's say I'm in jar and the CPS stack is not enabled. I mean, this is no longer an issue. Let's say this impediment has been resolved. So I can remove it from here and say the stack has been validated and enabled. So I comment to the engineer, to he or she, right? So that people are not working blindly. All right, great. Now and doing this in jar, I could do this in Jira itself as well, since I'm floating around in jar. And notice that now my ticket does not have the impediment flag. So if I were to query Jira, because every time I put these queries, I'm not querying Jira Advanced Roadmap, I'm querying Jira. 14 does not show up in my list anymore. And if I go into my backlog, and if I were to fish out ticket issue 14, you'll see that it will not have the impediment flag associated with it anymore. Does that help?
It sure does. Yeah, actually, I guess the other thing is that if you go into the ticket, you would see the history of it, right? So you would see that the impediment was raised and then it was removed and, everything was happening.
You're absolutely right. I did not address that second part of your question. My bad. Yes, you're right. So if you go into the history, that would be the way to fish out. Raf said that the impediment, by looking at the comments in the history itself, and you'll be able to actually see whatever activities that have occurred, including the removal of the flag and who removed it, right?
Perfect.
Awesome. Great point. Thank you for the reminder. Any other questions?
No, I think I was trying to get people to just suggest things. But I'm hoping that that's a matter of you explaining it well enough. So, and that everybody's getting everything out of it.
Let's hope that's the case. Going along with where I left off, some product managers and POs, they like to play with features individually when they are done, right? They when I see that feature myself, right? I usually tend to introduce in organizations that I coach this concept of not just sprint demos, but at the end of the feature complete milestone where all the features need to be done, let's have a demo day, meaning for the release as an organization, now all the features are done. Before we go into the hardening sprints to harden the release, let's demo to everybody, all the features collaborating one with one another, right? Now, in the absence of that feature complete date, some product manager says, hey, I like to have that feature done by a certain date so that I can kind of like tweak it, make sure that it does what I think, that I meant to. And so a lot of product managers will use this feature, the due date. And the due date is really not a feature date, epic date. It's really available everywhere. Just in the context of the feature date, I can just use this and articulate, can I get to engineering? Can I get that feature done by this date? Now, engineering is ranking based on stories and task and bugs when they're looking at the backlog, not in terms of features. So this is really more of a desire for me as a product owner to describe to the team, I would love to see this feature done by X date, so that I can actually articulate a certain target date. Now, if the time passes by, Jira Advanced Roadmap will do a reasonable job. And it's in the case of this warning here that you see in this grayed out feature. There's a bang box with a, let me remove that. I'm looking at impediment, that filter, so that bang box is a little more clear, even though it's tiny. And hovering over it, it tells me what warnings are there. And one of the warnings happens to be that the due date of this feature, for example, I'm the product manager, but I have a due date that I articulated to the team, and it's way set in the past. So it not only gives me a warning, but it also tells me what our resolution is. And one of the resolutions is either update the due date at the epic level, or set the dates on and before the due date. So I'm just going to go ahead and look into the future and say, you know what, that was good, but this is one of the features that we slipped from the past release. We move it forward. So I'm going to update the due date by this date. I'm articulating to the team, I would love to see if this feature can be accomplished or done, so that I can tweak it, so I can play with it way before we release it into the world. And so by refreshing the screen, sometimes Jira Advanced Roadmap on the cloud, it does the updates magically, and sometimes it doesn't. In this case, it did it magically because now I have a different warning. And so if I am the Scrum Master, the program manager working with the product manager, I can look at these warnings and proactively address issues that your Advanced Roadmap is raising, again, to collaborate as a team and to unblock the teams to have everybody rowing in the same direction, right, with the same understanding. I can see the warnings here too, listed. When I click on the warning button in the top right corner here, and it will list me how many issues are affected. And if I click on that hyperlink, it will actually open up a table that shows me what are the issues specifically. And from here, I can open the tickets individually because everything is hyperlinked to the respective Jira projects, right? Notice that it's aggregating the information from the two teams that I have working in this fake project, right? Fictitious project. Again, lots of power, lots of ability to aggregate data and collaborate between multiple teams using their boards or using their project data, as long as you have rights to see that information. To the comment that was made earlier about having rights, you have to have rights to see the data. And that's, I mean, the last thing that I would mention is that in that context is that I've seen some teams use the due date very effectively. I also see some organizations that what they do is they overload the fixed version field or the release field in Jira. That is, I have a fixed version that is set up for my Q2 release or my Q4 release, right? And I can look at the releases here. These are fixed versions are in Jira. And say, for example, and this has proven to be rather effectively. Actually, is the more preferred method that I noticed that some organizations have orbitated towards too. Say, for example, for the Q4 or the Q2 release, the release is in June 30th. And they decided, you know what? We want to declare a feature complete date because we have like 4 weeks of hardening. And during those 4 weeks of hardening, in order to enter the hardening release, you have to have all the features completed. And then during the hardening cycles, you're not developing new features. You are doing really more of a scalability, performance testing, security testing, integration testing, all that kind of testing that it goes beyond the feature testing itself. And so some organizations create an FC release, or for example, to articulate that, you'll have the R2024.Q2-FC. And so what they do, they mark all the epics and the stories with the FC fixed version. And they have all activities that are post feature complete tagged with the Q2 without the FC. I mean, what that does is when you're using a tool such as Jira Advanced Roadmap or Big Picture or ALM structures, it allows you, whichever of the tool that you use, it allows you to create a crisp view as to what is the work that we're trying to complete for the feature complete milestone, so that we can get everybody really focused and centered, from engineers and test, in the work that the brunt of work that needs to occur in order for us to have a release with confidence. And then what is additional work after we hit the feature complete that needs to occur between that feature complete date and our GA date, when we release to the world, to the wilderness, which is June 30th. And usually there's a gap there of most organizations will have between 4 to 6 weeks of hardening. I'm not saying all they do that, but a lot of them do. And so overloading the fixed version field is another way that you can actually articulate, this is the due date where I need all the features to be done, except that that is a milestone that everybody must agree on and you are driving towards too. And once that milestone is hit, people don't quite pop the champagne, but they pop a couple of bottles of champagne, they celebrate, they actually demonstrate the features, because a feature by itself may behave, but during the integration testing, putting all those features together might manifest some issues that will do with performance and scalability and integration issues. And so during that hardening cycle, the engineering team focused their attention not on developing new features, but in crushing bugs that could block that release from going out into the door with quality. And so that is more of a conversation that the release team, but the release management team will manage together with engineering. But the product managers are paying attention to a lot of that noise in order to understand if we're ranking the bugs or the tasks that are remaining during the hardening cycles well enough that guarantees us that we're going to have a solid product. And often than not, you run out of time. So you want to be able to negotiate and say, these issues need to be fixed, and these issues we can actually punt for our next release as a technical debt, right? Because we're running out of time and we don't have more resources and more money. So it becomes a compromise, right? But you don't want to compromise on the quality to the point that your customers are going to say, well, this is a great app, but it crashes all the time. And so that's what usually you try to accomplish during the hardening cycles. And you can use Jira Advanced Roadmap, for example, to show, like if I create a milestone called FC, it will show up here. If this is my release to the wilderness, to the world, and I create an FC milestone. And so I can use that milestone to drive the teams to, like, let's keep driving, let's keep working. And if I happen to have epics that they don't have any work that is associated with it, the closer this yellow line gets to the fixed version, to the blue line, then we have to have conversations about, do we de-scope that work? Do we add more resources? how do we de-risk the release? Or do we just really slip the release altogether? Those features are important and we have to release with those features, right? Those are realities of actually, software development or product development life cycles. Then in the ideal case scenario, paper will hold everything. But when you're executing and you're peeling the onion and discovering more complexity, sometimes that will affect the ability to deliver. So you use these tools to actually manage those risks and have those difficult conversations with a lot of tequila and a lot of whiskey to go along with it. Aside of that, I don't have a lot more issues aside of or topics aside of the fact that you can embed a lot of that information into Confluence. In this case, I'm showcasing a response page where product and engineering are responding, right? They're providing responses. And this is not an editable field. It's more of a display field. If you want to edit that epic again, I'm using Windows, so I'm hitting Control-Shift and I'm opening up that epic. And then I can update the fields here, the description, or in this case, the response field here. Some teams rather have the responses in Confluence. Many teams that want to keep Jira as a holy grail of all the information. So even the responses, I want to keep it within Jira so that they can have historical data that is accurate. The feature ranking field, which is a custom field that I create to rank the features, you can also expose it in Jira so that if you decide to rank features as a PO, you could do so here. Now, Raf, let's say I'm not the PO and Angie's a PO, and I go here and go like, I don't like this feature, so I'm going to make it, 30 sneakily, and I just update it. And at some point, Angie's going to go and say, who did that? I wonder who I have to go after, who's going to drop off from my Christmas present list, right? I can go into the history, and Jira will keep a history of, it was that slacker called Raf. It's like shame, 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 right? I get the poo-poo box. And so it's not to be punitive, but the idea here is to have conversations. Hey, Raf, why did you put, because I just didn't like that. Well, that's not how you rank. You rank based on customer needs, right? On customer value, on the business value. So you relegate the ranking to the PO, and the PO has the ability to update that and put some comments here. But the theme that I'm trying to articulate is that a lot of this information is all interlinked with Jira, whether it's from JAR or Jira. And then the ability for you to embed the plans into Confluence. And this is something I showcased last week. So if you're trying to articulate the actual execution of the plan to a larger crowd, and you don't want them to go into Jira or Jira Advanced Roadmap, say, for example, your VPs, they don't care about going to Jira for the most part, your senior directors. So you can articulate that into Confluence and communicate it from there. This is a read-only view. So if you have a trigger-happy senior director of engineering, and they start going here and start trying, clicking around and being happy about clicking everywhere, and suddenly you mess up your original view, fear not. It's a read-only view. So a lot of the changes, whoever do this here, is a read-only, so it doesn't stick. However, the view is live in the sense that every time you go into this view and you refresh the page, if engineering is actually executing on the progress and you want to speak to the accuracy of the progress of that particular feature, every time you refresh this page, it does a pull of the data from Jira with the latest understanding. So this beats having to put the data into PowerPoint, where the data is maybe 3 days old or 4 days old and progress has occurred underneath. And so this will do a pull and will show you in a read-only fashion the latest information from under the artifacts underneath, right? So very useful when you're doing presentations to a larger crowd that is your leadership, whether senior leadership or mid-level leadership, and you want to report on the progress and where you at in the context of your planned release or releases. So
yeah, that read function, read-only function is really great. I do have cats, as you guys have seen through the presentation. They like to run around, and I'm not one of those where it's like, my dog ate my homework. Sometimes my cat hits the keyboard. So having the read-only function is really great, because then that way you're not messing up anything that you didn't need to do or you didn't want to do. So I hate to cut you short, because I feel like you could just keep on going, and this was fantastic. But we are about 6 minutes over. So, and I know there had to be some people that have had to drop off for other meetings and stuff. So this was really wonderful, Ralph. I'm glad you stuck around, and everybody in the audience learned a lot from these 3 sessions. It was amazing. I'm sure we could probably add another one. And we'll take a poll at some point to see if we want to do this again, because I think it's so valuable. And of course, Atlassian always likes to put in new goodies. So I'm sure the next time we have you on, you'll show us even more wonderful new features.
Yeah, Ralph.
Yeah,
Ralph, thank you for all your generous actual sharings over these last 3 sessions. It's been absolutely amazing. I think if anybody wants to come off microphone, if they've cut their microphone, they can come off microphone and at least actually express their gratitude. Thank you, Ange. Thank you.
And I thank you to you all for co-hosting and hosting this event, and actually for the audience for having the interest to be here. Hopefully I did not give you nightmares with these topics as much as food for thought. You know, this is just different ways of slicing the pie, if you will, you know.
No, it just reminds me every day when I'm in DevOps that it doesn't do this stuff, and I really wish it would. So yeah. If there is anybody who wants to come up on stage, feel free. Otherwise, maybe we'll just end it for here, and we'll have you on again.
Excellent.
Thank you, Ralph. Right. Look forward to seeing you again.
Right on. Thanks,
everyone. And we'll look forward to watching the video afterwards.
Yay.
Have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Have a great day.
Have a great day.